this is not a bad team. This is a pretty good team with a good core, but when you don't supplement that core for going on 18 months now, you fall behind the rest of the pack.
Friend of the show, Aaron Gleeman, joining us right now on FT. Writes for The Athletic, covers the Twins also all over the free agent scene as they keep track of their big board all off season long. And you can hear him on Gleeman and the Geek, the leading podcast for the Minnesota Twins. Aaron, great to have you on, man. And let's dive into the Twins for a moment first. I know this is going to take you about 20 minutes, but can you break down all of the major league moves by the Twins so far this offseason?
Well, I can tell you that my podcast co-host, John Bonus, went to Australia for a month-long vacation and missed no major league transactions by the Minnesota Twins. So that's been the type of offseason that there's been. There have been a couple of waiver claims, some minor league signings. They traded for a couple of AAA catchers. That's really honestly been it. And I didn't have huge expectations mostly because of the payroll issues for them making moves coming into the offseason. But I certainly expected more than this. And it's been such little effort really of any kind. And I know it's more so the ownership doing that than the front office doing that. Their hands are kind of tied, but particularly in this division, which is not that much effort collectively between the 5 teams, it's still disappointing even with some low expectations.
All right, so I got 2 things for you. Number one, our first-class production team wants just like a little tilt down on the camera so we get the full Gleeman experience. Boom, there it is. Beautiful, nice and squared up.
There it all is for you.
You get it all there. Yeah, we got the nice facial hair rolling here in the offseason. Okay, and 2 is, because we smashed the ownership. They're going to sell. This is going to be awesome. We can get into that at one point. My question is on the front office. So we haven't seen trade deadline activity because they don't have any money to spend. So I'm like, that, I think, going into it. So can you save a little bit of space so that you can pull off a trade to improve your team at the deadline? Because it is debilitating to do that. Same question for the offseason. Having the same exact team from year to year when you weren't a playoff team doesn't make sense. So I'm like, would they have been better off just doing something and taking a risk and subtracting from their major league team to just at least switch it up? It also garners a little more fan excitement. You have something new heading to the season that you can promote.
It is strange really, if you go back, not only now this offseason, but like you said, last trade deadline, and even going back to the previous offseason and it's been almost 18 months really since they've added, I'm pretty sure if my math is right, anybody making more than $5 million to the major league roster. So you're talking about basically 2 seasons worth, going back to when they re-signed Correa essentially. And it is just very strange to go that long providing almost nothing good or bad for your fan base to talk about, discuss, speculate about. And it's just kind of rolling it back. And like you said, it wasn't exactly, they finished horribly. They ended up 82-80. So it's not a terrible team, but the sour taste they left at the end of the season because of their collapse makes it all the more frustrating that they haven't done anything. My assumption was coming into this thing that they would try to shed some salary, maybe with a Christian Vasquez trade or a Chris Paddock trade. Those are really 2 guys they're making $7 to $10 million. That would give them a little bit of breathing room. I think they're open to that. I just think there hasn't been much market for those guys, at least if they don't want to eat a bunch of that salary. But what it really does is, you can roll back this team. Nobody's going to be all that excited about that. But they have, this is far from a perfect roster. I think, first base, corner outfield, DH, right-handed bats. If they could spend even $5, $8, $10 million, even something like they did last offseason with Carlos Santana, I think that would make a big impact. But they're so hamstrung financially that they just have to sit on the sidelines for even the low wattage type of moves.
Aaron, why are they hamstrung? Is it because of the imminent sale of the team? Is that why? Because the Pohlads have plenty of money. The Pohlads have more. They have all the money in the world. They're not tight on money. They have larger payrolls before. Don't use the TV deal because I'm tired of hearing the TV deal. The Twins get a huge fan base. They get big numbers. People watch them. People go to the games. People buy Twins jerseys. I've walked around Minneapolis before. There's Twins jerseys everywhere, right? What's the reason behind them not spending? I don't understand. Derek Falvey, I feel bad for him. He's out there. He puts a team on the field that wins their first postseason series in 20 years. And then they're like, oh, you got to cut payroll. The fans are going crazy. Then they look at the divisions. They say, no one else in our division is really doing anything. We could win it again in 25. Oh, but we haven't signed not a bunch, major league free agent this offseason. Why?
I mean, I agree. I feel like every time I come on the show, we together combine to rant against Twins ownership. And then I hear from Twins people who are like, yeah, that's not that far off. I think your point that to separate out the front office from ownership, if you're a Twins fan, I think is valuable because Derek Falvey is going to get the criticism when they don't make moves because he's the public facing front office boss. But the reality is, if they have a $135 million payroll, let's say, and right now the roster's at 140, what is he supposed to do? You have to subtract in order to add. And so I agree with everything you said. I think it was a massive mistake for them to, as you said, follow up the first successful postseason in 20 years by slashing 30 million in salary. And then to follow that up this offseason and basically make it known that salary is going to stay in the same range when 3 years ago they were at 160. So if they just grew at a normal pace, they might be at 180 right now, which would probably put them middle of the pack. Now they're at 135. They're down with teams that are just not spending. And I think part of the problem and the reason they're so hamstrung from a roster standpoint is that it's not just the slashing of the payroll that hurts, which it does. It's the slashing of the payroll after you allowed Falvey and company to sign $160 million worth of players, including some long-term deals for Byron Buxton, Carlos Correa, Pablo Lopez. Those are all good deals. Those are all, impact players. But if you build up the payroll to 160 and then all of a sudden the next year or the next 2 years they tell you, oh, actually you need to be at 130, well, you already have commitments long term. I mean, Correa's making 30 something million a year. You can't undo that. And so that really, it's not so much the payroll limitations itself, it's the payroll limitations coming after they already added so much long term money to the books.
Just the 1998 to 2003 Twins that we're talking about here, because this sounds awfully familiar when I was playing for the Twins. Oh, we got to cut payroll, and then we get a new stadium. We can have all the payroll we want, except now we got to cut it again. I mean, that's it. That's my comment. We can move on, Cam. You can talk about something else. But for me, as someone that came up in the organization and someone that actually cares about the Twins, because there's still a lot of people there that I know, and I know how much they, the Mike Hermans, the Dustin Morrises, a lot of the people behind the scenes that nobody knows. They want to win. And so for me, it's just like they can take this division, but that's it. All right. On to the next.
You set it up perfectly, AJ. With all of that said, so I don't have to touch on it, is this a situation where because of the spending, when I look at the roster, do they just believe that this roster still can compete? Like I see you still have three decent, top of the line starters in that division. You're banking on Royce Lewis and Kyle Larnick and Eddie Julian, I'm guessing. Like, do they still just think that if healthy, Byron Buxton, God willing, he can stay on the field. If healthy, they still feel like they still with this roster can be competitive. Is it just as simple as that as well?
I mean, that's definitely part of it. But they also, I think, thought that last year. And 2/3 of the way through the season, that was looking pretty accurate. And then they just completely collapsed. I don't think this is a great division. I mean, this is really never a great division. I think 85, 88, certainly 90 wins might win this division. And they're probably capable of that. I do think this is a winning team, even with the collapse they finished with 82 wins last year. Like you said, I mean, the Lopez, Ober, Joe Ryan top three is good in the rotation. I think, Duran and Jax is leading a strong bullpen. They do have, Correa, Buxton, Royce Lewis in the lineup, but they're really missing like the complementary pieces that you would add to free agency, 5 million, 8 million, 10 million, the small trades that are kind of fixing up the margins of the roster. And that may seem unimportant compared to those core guys that I just mentioned. But if that's the difference between, another 82 win season and getting to 87, 88, 89 wins, that could be, like we saw last year, the difference between making the playoffs and not making the playoffs. And so I think that's part of the frustration. This is not a bad team. This is a pretty good team with a good core, but when you don't supplement that core for going on 18 months now, you fall behind the rest of the pack.
I'll follow with this then. Everything in house. How does the farm system look? Is there, right? You talk about moves via trade. Do they have the prospect wherewithal to go out and move some pieces, or like you said, those little pieces where you can go get a guy that's durable, right? Right now they need guys that are durable. Do they have the pieces in their farm system to make that move where anybody will bite and kind of see what they can get via trade?
I mean, they do have a good farm system. Walker Jenkins is probably a top 5, top 10 prospect They have Emmanuel Rodriguez, who's like a consensus top 25 guy. Brooks Lee is not a prospect technically, but he debuted last year. Luke Keisha. I mean, they have some real, high-end top 100 type of guys. The problem is, first of all, Minnesota generally over 30 years doesn't trade a whole lot of prospects. And particularly with the payroll situation, you need young, cheap, good guys to be coming up and taking on these roles. And so, if anything, I think, yes, they could trade some of those guys to pick up the pieces that I was talking about. But I think the more likely thing is this year, next year, the year after that, they're going to be leaning more heavily. And like AJ said, it's going to be like the days when he was there, where it seemed like every season back in the late 90s, early 2000s, they had 2 or 3 young guys, whether it was a starter or an everyday player, who they were expected to come in, provide, above average production, but as importantly, minimum salaried production. And I think they've sort of gotten back to that, where they're going to have to lean on the farm system and some of those names I mentioned to step up and fill gaps. If it's opening day, maybe not, but mid-season, a guy like Emmanuel Rodriguez is going to be the bat that they add, because they just haven't been able to spend on veteran versions of that player.
All right, so Aaron, let's get crazy for a second. If you were in control of the Twins, but you had the payroll restrictions, what would you do? Give me something crazy that would at least switch things up. The name that I think would be super coveted and be able to get you something different and younger and cheaper for them to even open up other areas is Pablo Lopez. I know it hurts, but I'm like, is there a fit with a team like Baltimore that I think desperately still needs an upper echelon starter to be able to make it work, where they can get a younger starter back, maybe 2, and still another bat to help them? Your thoughts?
I think you're right. I mean, they only really have 3 guys making money. It's Correa, Pablo Lopez, he just mentioned, and Byron Buxton. They're like making over half the payroll. So it does make sense. I'm sure you could get significant return for Pablo Lopez, but here's the problem. If the Twins are planning to contend, they're not going into a rebuild. I mean, you can't rebuild around Carlos Correa. That would make no sense. If you're not going to rebuild this thing, how are you going to get a big return from a team that wants Pablo Lopez, wants to add an in their prime, number 1, number 2 starter, but is also willing to send you back major league pieces or major league pieces that are going to help you compete? It's a hard, I think, to find a fit. You would, as you said, maybe trade him for a AAA pitcher and then bank on that pitcher making an immediate impact. I mean, to me, the at the baseline, what I expected them to do at this point was, Christian Vasquez is under contract for $10 million. Chris Paddock is under contract for $7.5 million. I thought they would really make an effort to shed as much of that salary as they could, even if it equaled not getting much in return, just so you could create $5, $8, $10 million that you could go out there and fill in some of the more pressing needs for this team. Because, I'm not saying Vasquez and Paddock are not valuable players, but Paddock is the number 5 starter, and they have David Festa who could step in. Vasquez is a light-hitting backup at this stage of his career. They have bigger needs than that. But unless you can unload a decent amount of salary, you just can't go shopping even in the scratch and dent aisle of free agency yet. So the Lopez thing would shake things up incredibly, and I'm sure you could get big value for him. But the problem is, first of all, that sends a horrible message to a fan base that is already pretty frustrated. But then beyond that, are you really going to try to trade Pablo Lopez and still go for this division? Or if you make the commitment to trade Pablo Lopez, are you really then kind of, stepping halfway into a rebuild that would involve trading other guys? And then what happens with Correa? What happens with Buxton? They have no trade clauses. So it's a tricky spot, and it all, flows from ownership. I realize this is a very big buzzkill segment for Twins fans, so I'll say this. There is some hope that there is a sale, if not by opening day, then somewhere close to the start of the season. And, we don't know who's going to buy it. We don't know if they'll have the same spending attitude as the Pohlads, although I would argue it can't be much worse than that. And so that's the hope, is that there's an ownership change coming, certainly at some point this year. And when that happens, maybe they can get back to the 150, 160 range in payroll, which is not asking a lot. And that's a huge difference from the 130 to 135 range.
Well, let's finish with that topic, Aaron. Tell me about the possibility of the brothers who own the Phoenix Suns. Ishbia, I think, is how you pronounce it.
But don't they own a piece of the White Sox, so they can't buy the Twins also? I thought they own. Don't they own a small piece of the White Sox too?
Sell it off. They can sell it off.
They are. Right. I think in 2021 they together bought, I don't know what percentage, but a minority stake in the White Sox, which I'm assuming is a small percentage. So yeah, they'd have to sell that off. I mean, I had heard rumors that they might be. I mean, they're Chicago guys, so I'm sure they would theoretically prefer to buy the White Sox. But I don't know that
I've heard that.
Reinsdorf
I've
is
heard
ready.
that rumor.
Yeah.
Reinsdorf is
So-
not ready, but I've heard that rumor. That's why I remember when Reinsdorf said, "Make me an offer." That's who he was talking to.
Really?
Yes, because he knows they have the money and they have the want to.
Mm-hmm.
But now, if he's not going to sell, they probably don't want to wait around. They're like, oh, we can get the Twins now, probably for cheaper, new stadium, better team. Let's take them, see what happens.
I agree.
Yeah, and they've been publicly linked. My partner at the Athletic, Dan Hayes, had a good report a couple weeks ago linking them, their involvement. He's since reported that there are some other parties involved, and he's the one who had the report last week that there's some optimism that the sale is progressing and it could be around opening day. That is really what Twins fans are hanging their hat on right now. It's been a lot of frustration on the field, off the field, ownership-wise, lack of moves. There's this hope that kind of looms over everything now that somebody's going to come in here and hopefully be willing to spend. And if it's someone like the Ishbias or them, as AJ said, they not only are willing to spend, but they clearly want to win. They value winning over trying to squeeze out every dollar from the bottom line. But until that goes through, the conversations surrounding the Twins are, the ones that we're having right now.
Mm-hmm. There's a format in place, and just a comment here. You don't want second, third, fourth generation ownership groups. It's always a disaster. You want people that made their own money, and preferably on the younger side, doesn't have to be super young, but you want people that are going to have fun. It just is what plays, right? The billionaires that want to have fun, that are not counting every penny, is what works for every sport. And the more of those people you can get into every sport, the better off the sport's going to be. So I am rooting for the Twins to get what they want, the Twins fans, to get someone in there who actually gives a crap. So Aaron, thanks for joining us, dude. Always really enjoy the combo.
Thanks for having me, boys.
Wait, can we keep that going for a sec? Do you think that...
Sneezing?
Yeah, sneezing. Do you think that the Ishbia brothers who own the Suns, and sorry if I'm mispronouncing the name, I haven't heard their name on TV before, I just see articles. Do you think they're going, hey, we might not get the White Sox for 7 years or whatever it is? They might not really be up
Jerry's
for
made it
sale.
known he's not selling until he passes away.
Right. Well, I don't want to play that game.
If I'm
that's
them,
what I'm
why?
saying.
I can get another team.
Yeah.
And the White Sox need a new stadium. Jerry's made that abundantly clear that he wants a new stadium.
And guess what?
Why do you think Jerry wants a new stadium? So when he sells it, it's worth more. The
Correct.
Twins stadium was built in 2010. It's relatively new. It's still modern, right?
It's awesome. Yeah.
It's awesome. It's a great
park.
stadium.
Yeah.
Right? It's in the middle. And if you can get that team now for 1.5, let's say, and then, Jerry lives hopefully for a long time, right? 6-7 years, and then they sell it later, and they might not have a stadium. They might not even be in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. The big problem with the White Sox is that if you do want a new stadium, Chicago is one of the cities that will fight you and not give in. And even if you're so rich that you want to pay for your own stadium, there is a bigger umbrella at play. MLB and the owners won't necessarily let you do that, because if you do that, that's the leverage that other places will say, go pay for it yourself, right? The message from all is we don't do that. You know what I'm saying? So they might not be allowed to, even if they bought the White Sox. They might say, hey, we'll fund it. We'll do who is it? Steve Ballmer in LA, right? Didn't he do that for the Clippers? It's like, I'll just pay for it all myself. And some others have done it.
I think there's a little bit of him that regrets. If you talk to people,
Really?
He's like, well, because the team's not good anymore.
Yeah.
And so he built this new stadium thinking he'd have George and Leonard. Kawhi Leonard, right? And they're not good anymore. So he's like, man, I built this $1 billion stadium.
It could be good again, though.
You would think.
It's all cyclical.
They're
The
not
Warriors
bad.
are.
They're not bad this year.
Yeah, the Warriors have had an insane run over the last. I mean, I don't know about them this year, but I'm saying they've had a really good run, and I think they kind of funded their own spot too.
Yeah,
that franchise was not worth crap not that long ago, and now it's
not until Steph showed
beloved.
up.
Right. Hey, one other team related to baseball, guys, like Kratz. I think people forget, what was it, 12, 13 years ago? Frank McCourt owned the Dodgers, and they were kind of a mess. And now they're worth a little bit more.
Guggenheim Group came in and they put people in place. They were building to this, and people were like, oh, yeah, they're going to be great for the next 10 years. They're going to be great for a long time after that, and they've been great already for 10 years, and it hasn't been that long since we're screwing it up.
Hey, everybody. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content.
We're back here every weekday, all year long, so do not miss an episode.
The videos are coming in all day. Here's another video you might enjoy.
Baseball the way it should be covered.